Hello, everyone. Welcome tonight. My name is Kelly Shih. I am a senior manager and the strategy lead for our Public Service Leadership Institute at the Partnership for Public Service. For any of you that are not familiar with the partnership, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to build a better government and a stronger democracy. Through policy ideas that make government work better, leadership development, workforce programming, and convening conversations like this one tonight to help support the federal workforce. We know that many of you have been and continue to be challenged to manage your own emotions through swift and in many ways unexpected change. At the same time, you are simultaneously continuing your very important work for federal agencies, supporting your teams and staff as they too navigate the same environment. We also know that what you do matters, that you care deeply about public service, about the well-being of your colleagues, and the critical missions of your agencies, and the impact that you make on our country and across the globe. So on behalf of the partnership and everyone here tonight, we thank you for your service. Over the last few weeks, we have been hosting our Explainer series to help federal employees navigate the rapidly changing environment and provide some tactical information and tips to our attendees. We are also aware of the emotional toll that this environment may be taking on you. So this evening, we are hosting our third session of the Civil Service Support Series, which is a partner suite of programming to the Explainer series intended to offer holistic support to the public servants like you that we hold in the highest regard. I'm going to share a few housekeeping notes, and then we will jump into today's conversation. Throughout the webinar, we will answer questions that you submitted while registering, and you can also submit questions anonymously through the Q&A function here tonight. And we will work to get through some of those, although we will not be able to answer every question tonight. But please remember there will be future civil service support sessions as well as explainers, so be on the lookout for additional webinars in the coming weeks. We'll post all the support and explainer video conversations to our resource hub for federal employees. And my final note, while this discussion is geared towards current federal leaders and supervisors, it is an open forum, and we might have folks that are joining us from other outside communities like good government groups, the media, and private sector. We welcome all of you here and just want to flag that we won't be going specifically into how these issues might specifically impact those communities, although I feel like today's topic really is relevant to us all. So tonight, we have brought together experienced leaders who can offer some tools and strategies for building resilience through times of change and challenge. So let me pass it over to our amazing panelists for brief introductions. Mark?
Hi. I'm Mark Setton. I'm co-founder and CEO of pursuitofhappiness.org. We like to call ourselves by our URL. It's a very long story, but I fell in love with East Asian philosophy when I was a little kid in a Harry Potter kind of public school that had no magic. It was just gloom without the magic. And so I secretly found a book on Chinese philosophy behind me, and I thought, that's it. Just fell in love with Chinese philosophy. To make a long story short, I'm just fascinated by the linkage between East Asian philosophy, which is my field, of course, and modern science. And I think in some ways they're meeting, and that meeting is just makes me excited. Can't wait to get up in the morning. So, yeah. Oh, and by the way, we provide video materials, online courses, as well as text-based information on our website. So anyway, that's me.
Thanks so much, Mark. I think you're being very humble with your very extensive academic background, philosophy, science, research. And so we're really excited to dig into some of that tonight. Essey?
Yes, thank you, Kelly, and good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Essey Workie, and I'm with Multicultural Coaching. I'm a former therapist and a former federal leader. Anyone on the call who's from HHS, a big shout out to you. That's my alma mater, so to speak. I'm the owner and founder of Multicultural Coaching, and I provide a variety of leadership development services there. focusing on well-being and change management.
Thank you so much, Essey and Mark. So just to get started with some opening kind of remarks or statements, tonight's session is called How to Navigate Turmoil and Protect Emotional Well-Being. And you both bring really interesting, different, but with a lot of overlap, I think, perspectives to this topic. So I wanted to turn it over to you first before we get into some of our more specific questions on just your opening thoughts around this topic of navigating turmoil and protecting emotional well-being. So Essey, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, the one thing I would say about this topic is that it has to be customized to each individual. There is, of course, an evidence-based framework, which we will get into, but in order to make it effective, it has to be customized. And I'll give quick 3 examples of that. One is we're all starting from a different place, especially when it comes to loss and pressure. Any one of us may be dealing with death or divorce or other disappointments in life already embedded into our life circumstances. And so what we're talking about on the work front is a layer on top of those things. And then secondly, whatever strategies we talk about or warning signs around struggling with the turmoil is going to be within a framework again, but very nuanced and specific to each person. So I would invite everyone listening to listen for that part of the conversation, how to make this applicable specifically for you in your life.
Thank you, Essey. Mark, do you want to start us off with some thoughts?
Yeah, actually bouncing off what Essey was saying, I mean, the great news, I think, through the research that is pouring in about well-being is that we're finding so many ways to increase our well-being. I think that's the fantastic news. But bouncing off you, a colleague of mine once listening to me talking, about all these different ways said, "Oh, don't we have to make our own happiness soup?" And it is, there's lots of ingredients, but you need to experiment to see what is the most delicious soup for you that makes you happy. So yeah, I'm really big on experimentation, not culinary, well-being experimentation.
But we're all here for a good analogy. I love that, and here we are in the opening minutes, and we already have a great analogy around happiness soup. I'm going to be using that one. So into our first question, we are going to be spending a lot of today's conversation discussing the longer term sustainable strategies around emotional resilience, but I want to start with what a lot of people are experiencing in the here and now. So Essey, I'll go to you first, but recognizing all the turmoil of recent weeks and how it can have significant impacts on mental and emotional well-being, can you share a little bit more about first, how you define and identify that turmoil to begin with, and then how folks might be able to navigate through these initial stages of that emotion and stress?
Absolutely. Let me take a step back here. I was a federal leader for 10 years, and for the last 7 years, I've been coaching federal leaders. And generally speaking, there are 2 archetypes of federal leaders and why it may be difficult for them to recognize the turmoil or emotional pain that they're experiencing. One archetype is this achiever, the doer, the one that everyone goes to. And the other is the servant leader. And of course, there may be some overlap, but the servant leader is always concerned about everyone else's welfare and really not investing that much in their own. And so these 2 archetypes are admirable qualities, what we want in leaders, but when they're in excess, they can keep us from recognizing what is happening within our own inner world. And so I want to throw that out there. For anyone who wants to be attuned to what the situation is doing within themselves so that you can be self-aware and manage yourself, there are 3 steps that I would recommend. One is to spend some time understanding what emotional resilience is. Some people think of resilience as a buzzword with good or bad connotations to it, but really we're talking about 3 things. One, coping strategies. 2, recovery from whatever adversity. And then 3, taking note about how am I doing mentally and emotionally. So those are the 3 questions you can ask yourself. And then secondly, pay attention to yourself. A lot of cues are going to come from being quiet and still, and try to be honest with yourself, because you can perform in such a way, especially on Zoom, where everything looks fine, but you know the truth about how things are really affecting you behind the scenes. And then thirdly, specific areas to pay attention to. One is biological aspects. How are you sleeping? How are you eating? Is it more or less than usual? What are your social interactions like? Are you isolating more than usual? Are you having conflicts in your relationships, trying to be more controlling or domineering? Those are indications. And then finally, from a cognitive or mental perspective, are you obsessing over things? Are your behaviors kind of compulsive, where you're shopping a lot, or you're on social media or TV or these kinds of things, or even checking emails every 2 minutes during your off time? These are all indications that you may need to take some action around your emotional resilience.
Thanks, Essey. And I already recognize some of those things for myself in the last few weeks, so that's really helpful framework. Mark, do you want to take a stab at sort of the same kind of recognizing turmoil, also initial strategies for this stage of dealing with things?
I think Essey is the expert in this area. I can't, I've lost my job 3 times, but in each situation, I was given a year's notice. So I just can't imagine what a significant chunk of the federal workforce is going through. I can't imagine. And I've been through, some traumatic experiences, but I can't claim that, that I can put myself completely in the shoes of, those affected. So I would stick with what Essey is saying. I think that was, very wise and organized advice.
Thanks, Mark. And I know that even if you don't have a one-to-one experience and know exactly, I know that individual stories on how we've overcome resilience in a lot of different ways can often translate. And so I'm sure people would be interested to know some of those things that you've taken away from those experiences, but I'll let you start with the overview around your work. So in your work, and if you want to pull in any of those personal stories, very welcome to. But in your work, you look at the science and the research behind well-being. So
Yes.
Can you start with a kind of high-level overview of what the latest research says around
Sure.
maintaining well-being?
Sure. By the way, just getting back to what you were saying, it's very strange how some of you may have already experienced this, but the most troubling moments of my life have been the most eye-opening, right? It's in those moments of greatest struggle and challenge, a door opened, right, that ended up making me happier than I was. And it's in one of those moments that actually a suicidal student approached me, and it was she wrote me an anonymous letter, and she woke me up. She said, what, you're teaching too technically. It's like, what you're saying is extremely important, but why all the long words? What's the therapeutic, and that changed the whole direction of my life, just that one anonymous letter. And that was a time of great difficulty for me too. So I just wanted to say that. The moments of challenge are the moments of where I was pushed out of my comfort zone, and I actually became happier over the long term. But anyway.
Yeah,
So,
if I could say one thing, because I just
yeah.
heard this in a talk today, and it was one of those kind of talking point things that stuck with me, is someone said, you can see people and you see if these moments break them or break them open, or you can kind of identify that in your own life too, of those kind of crucible moments and how that might be the place for renewal. And in that, one of my favorite quotes is from a Vietnamese monk named Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's no mud, no lotus. And so it's sometimes those darkest places that create really beautiful things.
That's one of my favorite quotes.
I thought you might like that, so I thought I'd throw that in there, but I'll throw it back to you for the question.
Yeah. Mind you, Buddha was the last, I don't think Buddha was the best example because he was born in a palace. There was no mud, So anyway, I won't start launching accusations of Buddha. I think that's the worst thing I can do. But beautiful quote, thank you. So in terms of the science, I was asked to, because of our nonprofit, right? The mission of our nonprofit is to provide science-based information about well-being. I fell in love with science, even though I'm a philosopher, and specifically because I was asked to teach a course on Introduction to Social Science. And I told my dean, I said, why? Yeah, I'm a philosopher. Why are you asking me to teach Introduction to Social Science? And he said, oh, history, because I did intellectual history at Oxford. He said, history is part of social science. So you just got to do it. So I ended up teaching the scientific method that I knew nothing about. And isn't it funny how, way down the line, you learn about something totally eye-opening. And I just fell in love with the scientific method. So believe it or not, as a philosopher, I do research. My latest research is on the biomedical components of well-being. And I was asked to give a talk in Switzerland about this. And my audience, the whole audience is full of scientists. And it's like, what? This philosopher is talking to us about science? So I said, well, wait a minute, we invented science. So shut up. Philosophers, Aristotle, right? He founded the field of science. So, I think they got the joke. But seriously, I fell in love with that intersection between the wisdom, Asian wisdom and science. And it's astonishing the resonance between them. And that's what gets me out of bed. It's like there must be something there. So what I did is, in order to make a presentation in Switzerland, it's called the second elephant in the room. And the whole idea is that traditionally well-being, right? Psychological well-being has been dominated by the psychologists. And, because of this unfortunate division between social science and natural science. So well-being has tended to sort of emphasize, I'm not saying it's not important, the psychological component, but the biological component is huge. And Essey just mentioned this. And so what we did is our team carried out an evidence-based research onto what were in the last 5 years, what are the most scientifically strongly backed things you can do for your well-being. And we did it quantitatively, right, in terms of the number of scientific systematic reviews and what we call RCTs, randomized controlled studies. And there was some shocks. I mean, I just did this. I thought, okay, I'm not going to depend on, pop psychology or whatever, right? I'm going to just look at the data. Number one was exercise, which didn't actually completely surprise me. There's a lot of research showing that certain kinds of exercise, especially and surprisingly, resistance exercise and mixed exercise, those two. And mixed exercise, like common sense, right? Because you're involving not many parts of your body, but resistance exercise is really useful too. And the impact that has on so many neurotransmitters. So in the beginning, it's tough, right? If you're not used to exercise, but after about 3 weeks or a month, when it kicks in, it's just more valuable. And I hope there's no pharmaceutical CEOs listening, but it's at least as effective as the strongest of antidepressants over the long term. And I can give you all the reviews that sort of indicate that. The second was very surprising. The second was mindfulness. And don't worry, you may have an image of what mindfulness is. It's like someone sitting in the lotus position, but there's so many kinds of mindfulness. By the way, how much time can I spend on this? Because I can go until tomorrow morning. And so I want, what do you think? I can zip through the 5 different areas.
Let's do the zipping method, because I think that we're probably going to come back to some more of these as we go through the conversation.
Yeah,
I do really want to
I'll
get
zip
to
through
Essey to
them.
talk about some of the sort of practical ways she's seen this with leaders she works with.
I'll zip through them. The second was mindfulness, and which was a big surprise, because we thought in the medical literature, why are they talking about mindfulness, right? And the where have I got it? The third was sleep, which also was a little bit of a surprise. The fourth was self-efficacy, the feeling that you're in control of a situation. And the fifth with nutrition, which I think everyone realizes with the discovery of the microbiome has an enormous impact on our mood. So those are the 5.
Thanks, Mark. And I know, I think many of us sort of have an instinctual understanding of a few of the biological ones around nutrition and sleep and exercise, but I'll probably come back to you around self-efficacy and just saying a little bit more about that down the line, because I'm sure people have questions. But Essey, I wanted to go to you now that we've heard a little bit about some of the science and the research that's been done. You work directly with federal employees, with leaders, and you coach them and support them through times like these. So I want to get some of that practical advice that you give as an executive coach around guiding folks through current change, not just through them right now, but building a foundation and tools for that increased emotional resilience.
Happy to do that. It's so helpful to have a scientific framework to work off of, because the solutions aren't always intuitive. And now we have something to point to and to guide us. So I so appreciate your work, Mark, and your colleagues' work in this area. In terms of practical application, it all comes down to a leader's relationship with themselves. In order to take the steps that Mark was talking about, whether it's exercise or mindfulness or nutrition or self-efficacy or any one of those, there has to be time spent investing in getting to know oneself, listening to oneself, taking actions to nurture oneself. And that's where the major pivot happens in terms of mindset, because a lot of leaders in public service and elsewhere are very focused on the work and the people on their teams, outwardly driven. So if you can make that shift where it's more balanced and you're also nurturing yourself, you're going to have a better shot at building emotional resilience. And if I may, I'll just add a couple of other things beyond the top 5 that Mark's research identified. There are other opportunities, including creativity. Any kind of creative expression will help to calm oneself and build resilience. Another example is laughter. It can be as simple as watching a 5-10 minute clip on YouTube of stand-up comedy. Or in terms of movement, let me say this very quickly. I've been heavy most of my life. And sometimes when I would hear things like, oh, exercise, it's like, one more thing that I have to do that I don't want to do that is problematic for me. But simply taking a 5-minute walk, or even sitting outside where you can watch the trees and the sun and so forth,
Right.
all of these things can help to reset the biology of a person so that they can better manage their stress. And Mark said this earlier, experimenting to figure out exactly what type of movement, exactly what type of mindfulness and so forth is going to be really important to make this effective. And the last thing I'll say here is think of it as building a muscle or training for a big endeavor like a marathon. You're not going to start there. You're going to start somewhere small, and with consistency over time, you will build that muscle of resiliency.
Thanks, Essey. Mark, I saw you maybe wanting to jump in there.
Yeah, no, I mean, there seems to be some sort of theme about experimentation and creativity going on. And you know what? This is completely unscripted, but so while I began doing this research, a few years back, I wasn't fit. And it's like, okay, this exercise does all this wonderful stuff, but it's, I can't even get out of bed. But then I started experimenting. And hang on a second, I'll show you something. So I experimented with this. I found out, you know what this is? This is a Bose speaker, and the sound quality, I'm not advertising, they don't give me any commission. But I
We're
found
not
out,
sponsored.
yeah, the sound quality is crazy. And I'm a huge fan of eclectic kinds of music. So like I'm huge Jimi Hendrix fan, as well as Vivaldi. And I found out that just by accident, if I was exercising and with my favorite music, it was just way easier. It was like going from climbing a mountain to skiing down the other side. And then, and I kept on experimenting. And you remember when COVID came, I used to swim, and swimming was a drag. It was extremely valuable for me, but I couldn't swim because of COVID, especially in the early days with Delta. So I thought, okay, and I experimented. I thought, how can I mimic what I do in the swimming pool? I thought, oh, maybe because I do the breaststroke, right? So I thought, okay, I'll get a stretch cord and I'll try to mimic what I do because swimming did fix my back problems and everything pretty well. And so I used a stretch cord to imitate the motions of swimming. And we know now, at that time I didn't know that stretching had a very significant impact on mood. And so there I'm listening to, I listened to Jimi Hendrix. I mean, I'd never do a video because, it's it doesn't look so elegant, but I'll have a stretch cord. I'll be listening to my favorite music and working out. And I get high. It's like, forget about cannabis. Yeah.
That is not what we're recommending on this video for federal employees. Yes.
Well, you generate your own cannabis.
Yeah.
The endocannabinoids, that's the latest, one of the exciting discovery in the last few years is we have an endocannabinoid system. So anyway, I won't go on.
I do remember seeing that in the very helpful deck you sent around your second elephant, with all of the 5 areas and that piece of science. That's really cool. Essay, back to you, just continuing on this, because, really I'm that person, right? That's like, that's great advice. I know I should sleep more. I know I should exercise, and feels like another thing to do, or another thing,
Yeah,
especially
right.
when people are going through so much right now
Yeah.
at work. And like you mentioned up top, as on top of all of the things that are already always happening in life for us. So can you go a little more into, when you coach leaders through this initial phase, you've been a wonderful coach for our Excellence in Government Fellows program, where they read a book around sort of one small step. And how do you do that kind of like building habits over time, or building more sustainable ways to change? Can you share more with us, for the leaders on the call, around how you can go in that direction?
Yeah, I sure can. So first, let me acknowledge that, yeah, this is something that takes effort and it does take time. And there isn't really any way around that. I don't want to minimize the effort that has to go into nurturing oneself. I will say, though, that it's kind of like a menu of options. It's very scalable. So the point is to start. The point is to do something. So Mark shared with us, I believe, 5 different areas of the framework. You don't have to do all 5 at once. Pick one and start small. For example, something that I do, especially when I have a busy day, is in between meetings, I'll take literally 2 minutes. I'll set a timer and I'll meditate, just meaning being quiet and still for those 2 minutes before my next meeting. And so it is about giving it some thought to where you want to start and what small step. I think you were referencing the Kaizen method of just making small changes here and there. The biggest hurdle is the mental shift of, yeah, I'm deciding I'm going to invest in myself. the other key is when we're under stress with change and uncertainty, everything in our system is telling us to do more, to fight, right? Kind of like the fight, flight, freeze response system. And it's tricky because that system is designed to protect us, but in our modern day setting, it is misleading. And instead of giving in to that adrenaline rush and the idea of fighting more or doing more or escaping and disconnecting altogether, the proper response, the healthy response, is to find ways to manage that stress by taking these small steps and building them up over time. So I would say start somewhere, do something small, and you can motivate yourself by remembering if you don't do anything now while you're in the midst of things, once the trial is over, the recovery process is going to be much harder, much more intense, and much longer. So it's kind of like investing in your retirement fund. You're losing money now up front, but it's going to accrue and capitalize and help you so much when you're ready to retire. It's the same thing. If you invest in your emotional wellness and resilience now, it's going to pay dividends in the future once the trial is over, so your recovery won't be quite as hard.
Another great analogy, like truly, I love the analogy because I think a lot of times when you get advice, you know, there's certain sort of visualizations or comparisons that like make it stick for you to be able to take that first step across the mental hurdle of it, you know, why should I do this? Like, how do I start to do this? So I really appreciate that advice, Essey. Mark?
Yeah, actually, that made me think about, what can we immediately do and what takes a lot of investment, right? And so again, bouncing off what Essy was saying, there are some things, that's the other great piece of news. There are things that we can do immediately that actually have a knock-on effect and influence our long-term well-being. So, for example, it looks as if biophilia, contact with nature, is much more powerful than we thought it was. And you mentioned that at the beginning of the talk, I think. So, for example, something very easy like calling up a friend or someone you live with, grabbing them by the hand, dragging them outside and going for a walk, especially early morning with the circle. I know you may not feel like getting up, but apparently the earlier the better, okay, 10 o'clock is way better than 12 o'clock, but the earlier the better, grabbing a friend or a loved one and just going out in something within a green area. And that has immediate effect. So there are things we can do pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can completely
Eating high fiber vegetables, sorry, yeah, that takes about 3 weeks.
No, I can totally attest to that. In fact, today, it's for any of you who are in the DMV area, was a beautiful day today, and I was not feeling the most motivated this AM, and so I just got out there. Got out there, felt the sun, felt a lot better after that. So that's really great advice. I also want to just remind folks on the call that you can be putting questions for our wonderful panelists at any point, as Haley has just reminded you, into the Q&A function, and we are very happy to take any of those. But I still have many questions left for both of you. And Mark, I wanted to come back to one of the strategies and the methods that you mentioned earlier. So number 4, I believe, was around self-efficacy. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what that means, what that looks like in practice, how might people actually sort of implement that and use that as one of their tools and strategies.
Right. Well, I guess the first thing to say is that, when the experimentation thing looms large again, because when you discovered, it could be going for a walk with your friend, or it could be, that little thing you do, that little step you take that makes a difference, that's the beginning of self-efficacy, right? It's the self-efficacy basically means the sense that you have some control over the situation, right? And I hate to quote philosophers because, you know, that usually sends people to sleep, but, you know, Epictetus, right? He makes it very clear, you know, when you're in a very stressful situation, work out what you can control and what you can't control. And it's just those little things like going out for a walk with your friend that you can control. And then you begin to build your self-efficacy, your sense of control over the world. I think that's how I'm trying to remember, you know, when I went through a time of extreme stress, I think the beginning of that feeling was walking on the beach, actually. And just, yeah, actually, I have to confess, I took a bottle of beer with me, but walking on the beach and yeah, just having a pint and meditating on the sea. I don't know, it had a huge impact, but we're all different. But that's, I think with self-efficacy, you take those small steps. The other very important component of self-efficacy is goal setting. And there's something called ikigai. It's a Japanese term, which means finding your purpose. And there's no, I don't, you know, we obviously don't have the leisure to, there's like an ikigai flower that you fill in, right? It's like it's the intersection of three Venn diagrams, what you love doing, what you're good at doing, which is sometimes different, right? I love dancing, but I'm a useless dancer, right? So, and then what the world needs. And so that Ikigai flower is a wonderful exercise where you find a meeting point. And then there's a fourth one with how you can make money. That's the fourth petal of the Ikigai flower. But actually that's not, you know, the Ikigai flower has been improved over the years. So that's like the American version is way more advanced than the Japanese version now. But yeah, Ikigai, just type the word Ikigai, Ikigai, and that's like a huge, very useful exercise in figuring out your trajectory, and that has a huge impact on self-efficacy.
I can't completely vouch for the URL that I just put in this chat because I did the thing of just Googling it and then finding one that looked pretty good and I put it in there. But so people can get the spelling if they want to look into it a little bit more. I put one in the chat. Essey, did you want to build on that at all and sort of how you see self-efficacy coming into the folks you work with?
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. You're so perceptive. I did want to jump in from a therapeutic perspective and a practical perspective as well. And Mark, feel free to disagree or correct me as you see fit here. The way I'm thinking of self-efficacy, it really has to do with thoughts like, I can trust myself. I have the ability to do something. And that changes the game when you're feeling uncertain and overwhelmed with all of the changes that are outside of your control. So again, it goes back to your relationship with yourself, even when we're talking about self-efficacy and goal setting. That's the therapeutic point I wanted to make. On a practical point, and this is something I practice for myself and I work with others, encourage them to practice, especially on days when I'm feeling overwhelmed. I ask myself, what is my number one priority for work? What is the number one thing that I need to get done today? I may have a million things on my list, but what is the one? And I ask myself the same question for my personal life so that there's balance. What is my one priority goal at home that I have to do? Maybe it's making an appointment or paying a bill or something like that. And then I can anchor myself. The whole day may have distractions, but I can always come back to, okay, I have 2 minutes. Can I make that call for my priority personal goal? Can I take a step towards my priority work goal? But that goal setting leading to trust and a sense of ability is very important in managing difficult situations like the ones we're in.
Thanks,
I mean,
Essey.
we're both talking about, oh, sorry, Kelly. We're both talking
Go
about
ahead,
goal
Mark.
setting, right? So I was talking about long-term goal setting, and I think Essey is talking about like the really practical, hands-on, daily goal setting. Yeah.
Yeah, and that really resonates with me in that I find it's good to remind myself that I can control that also, in that sometimes I don't even realize that I do it, kind of without even realizing that I'm doing it, that I've set some kind of like huge lofty goal for myself that day. And it's not even until I say, wait, if I don't achieve that today, well, like what's gonna, who's waiting for that? What's gonna, like the only thing there was that I was like, oh, I've decided today I must do like these 5 things, right? And then just reminding myself that actually I could choose, like I have, autonomy and that I have agency to just choose one of those things and then feel good about having done, one of those things. So it's a really practical way to look at that, and I appreciate it. And I'm also glad that you brought up the concept of overwhelm, which you mentioned in there, and I think is something that really resonates for a lot of people right now. So it's just one of the phenomena that we are experiencing in these last 8 weeks, is just the sheer volume of change and information and things that are coming down. And that's really compounded, I think, by uncertainty about the future. Will this pace continue? Will it pick up? Will there be different things? So can you talk a little bit, and I'll start with you, Essey, here, on how folks might prepare themselves or mentally and emotionally for sustained levels of change, or maybe a longer term kind of approach here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to contextualize this conversation, right? A lot of what we're referencing that has happened over the last 8 weeks is executive action and then some litigation in response to that. And of course, when things enter the judiciary, it can take a lot of time, months, years, excuse me, and there can be a little bit of a back and forth and back and forth, and adding to the uncertainty. And it's not a one and done kind of change. It's multiple changes over a protracted period of time, to your point, Kelly. And I think, of course, practice the different resilience strategies that we've been talking about. So that goes without saying. But in addition to that, to offer some other steps to make sure that each of us are okay in terms of our ability to pay for our lifestyles and still have a roof over our heads and food on our table. There are some steps that I would recommend. One is scenario planning. Think about the worst case scenario and plan for that. Do your best to think about the least predictable scenario and begin planning for that. That way you have some sense of, okay, if things go left, I'm going to do XYZ. A second idea is to kind of play with your time horizon. Generally, in leadership, we say the longer your time horizon, meaning how far out into the future you look, the better. But in this kind of situation, it's ideal to shift your time horizon. Sometimes look out multiple years, but because things are changing so often, don't spend a lot of time thinking way into the future. Focus on the now and sometimes dip into the future. So it's a little bit of a dance back and forth. The other thing I would say that kind of ties into that is plan your milestones. Because things are changing so frequently, what seems like the best course of action today may not be the best course of action in a month or 3 months. So just know within yourself that you're going to check back in and reevaluate, re-examine things to see if you need to shift gears. That doesn't mean there's a failure or that something has gone wrong. It means you're adaptive and swimming with the current of life rather than fighting it and being rigid during a season of change. I would also add taking breaks. I know that annual leave is precious, especially if there's a chance of not having work. You want to use that as money instead of time. But there are possibly other ways of taking leave, even if it's an hour of sick leave here and there, even if it's unpaid leave. But trying to push through without any rest, without any break, even on weekends, is not going to help you sustain for the long term. It's not going to help you make it through. Breaks are essential, whether they're 2 minutes in between meetings or they're a whole day off during the week. Then lastly, I would say as you're having your milestones or even a weekly practice, a daily practice, reflect on your wins. What did you do that you're proud of? What went your way? And make sure that you take the time to celebrate those. That helps with gratitude, and it also helps with giving hope that not all is lost, especially as we listen to the news or pain from colleagues. It can, again, be overwhelming and just beat us down energetically. So focusing on what is working well, what is there to celebrate, can also be very helpful.
Thank you so much, Essey. So many nuggets of wisdom. I'll focus in on that last one around the wins and just reflecting, taking that time and reflecting. I have used an app on my phone for, I think it's been 5 years now with every single day. I'm pretty sure that's a little mood tracker app, but it also lets you, many of us have heard, journaling is good, that kind of reflection. I don't have time to like write a journal entry every day, but my phone will give me a little ping and I'll try and choose how I'm feeling and I write a few things and it helps me kind of reflect and take stock and not just be like, how am I feeling literally right now, but take stock of the day, take stock of the week. It gives you this like data-driven report of how you've been doing this month and this year. It's not for everyone, but whatever way you might have of being able to like remind yourself and build in to your routine, that taking stock and reflecting on all of the things that have happened, not just the ones that are causing you a lot of stress, I think is really helpful. Mark, do you want to weigh in a little on where we are?
As soon as you said that, I thought, yeah, there's hundreds of very, very cleverly designed apps, but the big challenge is screen time, right? We know that there's a definite correlation between screen time, hey, we're talking on a screen, and depression, right? There seems to be a clear link between the number of hours you spend looking at a screen with your smartphone or a computer screen and depression. And so there are a lot of ways to deal with that. One is very simple. If I have to do something on my smartphone, I'll just sit on the front porch and I'll do stuff on my smartphone on the front porch. That's one way to get around and to sort of try to make sure that your screen time doesn't interfere with your circadian rhythms. And our connection with nature is so important. And as you know, technology is taking us further and further away from nature, which is a major reason why we're in the middle of this depression epidemic.
It's also great practical advice, and I've just put the one that I use is called Daily. I know you were just like, don't spend so much time on your phone. It's very quick, this one. And of course, if you're a analog, journaling person, I think that's great too. But appreciate that reminder around screen time. I think it's something a lot of us deal with. So I'm recognizing that we are coming close to the end of our hour. And I want to, before I go back to our wonderful panelists to give them some time to give us their closing thoughts, want to get your input on our sessions going forward. So we've already received a lot of great ideas for future sessions, but want to take the time to just ask all of you to answer 3 quick poll questions. So Haley, who's on the call with us today and supporting us, will launch that. And the first is about how effective you feel that this webinar has been. The second one is about how much you agree that you'll take this information and apply it moving forward. And the third, again, for your input, is seeing if you have ideas for future webinar topics. Your responses are anonymous, and they will be used to inform our future sessions. And we really appreciate your input. So before I go into my wrap of things, I wanted to give a chance for our wonderful panelists to share any other thoughts with us. So my question around this is always sort of, is there anything else I should have asked you? And anything else you'd want to share around this topic of navigating turmoil and building your emotional resilience? And Mark, I will start with you on this one.
Well, I mean, the one thing that, the one huge consolation behind all the research that's going on is that we're discovering more and more ways. There's more and more ingredients into the soup, right? I love gazpacho, the Spanish soup. I don't know, but so you may want to put more tomato or whatever. But we're discovering more ingredients. There's all kind of little tricks. It's so there's circadian. You can going out early in the morning. Uh, acts of kindness. There's listening to music. I mean, we're discovering many ways that we can literally change our neurochemistry, and those changes are very concrete. And I won't go into the neurochemistry, but which I would love to do, but you'd all fall asleep.
Well, I think we could say you can go to pursuitofhappiness.org to maybe
Well,
get
the biomedicals, you know what? I'll make the slides. I'll make my the biomedical research available. Let me make it available for everybody.
that. We
So
are so
yeah,
grateful for that. We really appreciate that. Thanks,
it's
Mark.
got pretty pictures, so
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's got pictures and facts, our favorite things. So thanks, Mark. And Essey, I'll go over to you. Anything else I should have asked you? Anything you want to share with our audience around this topic?
Thank you, Kelly. I do have a closing thought, and that is to manage expectations. It's going to be messy. Try not to make building resilience and emotional well-being about performing. This is not another area to get a gold star or an A+. It's really about a relationship with yourself, nurturing yourself, asking yourself, what do I need right now? How can I give myself what I need? So focus on being rather than doing, and don't make emotional well-being a performance area.
Being rather than doing. We've gotten being rather than doing, happiness soup. I've personally gotten a lot of amazing takeaways from this. So I want to say just a huge thank you to you, Essey, to you, Mark, for sharing your wisdom with us here today. For all the folks that are watching now, and then the ones that will be watching later on, as we all work towards building up our foundations around resilience so that we can face what's happening now, but also face everything that will continue to come in the future. So really appreciate you both. And so this conversation, as well as all of the other ones that we have, will be on our hub of support online, and Haley can share that in the chat, where we have our Supporting Federal Employees site. We want to thank all of you for what you do every day, for joining us tonight. Definitely continue to tell us what other topics you would like to see. Our next Civil Service Support Series is going to be held on March 26th, and it focuses on reestablishing team norms for those who are staying in federal service. And we would encourage you to share it with any of your friends or colleagues, or others who might benefit from this kind of support and this kind of conversation. Some of our future Explainer Series topics: on March 24th, we have How Can MSPB, the Merit Systems Protections Board, help me? And on April 2nd, Advice from an HR Director: How are resumes evaluated in the private sector? If that's something that you're thinking about. So again, don't forget to visit our resource hub for federal employees. We have FAQs, blogs, links to other resources there. For all the federal employees that are on the call, any former federal employees, all of us who support federal employees, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your service and everything you do every day to serve our country. Again, a humongous thank you to our two panelists today, Essey and Mark. Wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you.